The first dead whale appeared before sunrise, stretched across the wet sand like a warning nobody wanted to understand. By 7 in the morning, 5 more had washed onto the shore of Bay Harbor, Maine, and by noon the whole town smelled like salt, fear, and blame. News vans blocked the narrow road beside the beach. Fishermen stood with folded arms. Restaurant owners whispered about losing tourists, and children watched from behind police tape while their parents covered their noses and stared at the ocean like it had betrayed them. When Dr. Marcus Reed stepped out of a white research truck, the talking stopped for half a second. He was tall, black, calm, and dressed in a dark blue field jacket with the Federal Marine Response logo on the sleeve. He carried a medical kit in one hand and a waterproof case in the other. Before he could even reach the first whale, an older fisherman stepped in front of him and said, "You people from the city show up after everything is already ruined." Marcus looked at the man, then looked at the dying whale still moving weakly near the waterline. He said, "Sir, I am here to find out what happened." The fisherman laughed coldly and said, "Then start by leaving. We do not need outsiders making this worse." Marcus did not answer. He walked past him and knelt beside the whale. Its breathing was uneven, slow, and heavy, like every breath had to be dragged from deep inside its broken body. Marcus placed one hand gently near the animal's eye and spoke softly. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for the creature in front of him. He asked for water samples, tissue kits, and a clear path for the rescue crew. But every order he gave was met with silence from the local workers, as if helping him would make them traitors to their own town. A woman in a red coat pushed through the crowd and pointed at Marcus. Her name was Linda Barrett, owner of the biggest seafood restaurant on the harbor. "My brother saw your research boat out there last night," she shouted. "Now all these whales are dead. You expect us to believe that is a coincidence?" The crowd started murmuring. Phones lifted, cameras turned. Marcus stood slowly and said, "My team was not near this beach last night." Linda stepped closer and said, "That is what people like you always say when you get caught." For one moment, the air felt sharper than the wind. Marcus had heard words like that before, in college labs, at conferences, at police stops, in small towns where his degrees never arrived before his skin did. But he had also learned that anger wasted time, and time was something the ocean never gave back. He looked at the sheriff and said, "I need the area cleared. There may be toxins in the water." The sheriff, a broad man named Clay Mercer, looked at Linda, then back at Marcus, and said, "People have a right to watch what is happening in their town." Marcus stared at him, "And they have a right to not get poisoned while watching." That finally moved them. Slowly, reluctantly, the police pushed the crowd back. Marcus and his 2 assistants began working. They collected tissue samples, checked the whale's eyes, examined the mouth, and tested the water along the shore. Within an hour, Marcus found something strange. The whale's tongue had dark burns. Its skin showed chemical irritation. The first water test showed abnormal acidity, but not enough to explain a mass stranding. Then one of his assistants found small black flakes stuck under the whale's jaw. Marcus picked one up with tweezers and sealed it in a vial. It looked like ordinary ash, but when he held it to the light, it shimmered with a green-blue stain. His face changed. Not fear, recognition. By evening, the town meeting hall was packed. People filled the wooden benches, stood along the walls, and leaned in the doorway. Marcus stood at the front with a laptop and a map of the coastline projected behind him. Before he could speak, Linda stood up and said, "Before you tell us some fancy story, tell us why whales started dying the same week your research grant came through." A few people clapped. Someone in the back muttered, "Exactly." Marcus waited until the noise faded. He said, "These whales were exposed to a chemical discharge. The injuries are consistent with industrial waste, not natural illness, and not research equipment." A fisherman named Earl shouted, "There is no industry here." Marcus pointed to the map. "Not on the Maine harbor, but 12 miles north, near the old cannery channel, there is a private processing facility registered under North Point Marine Storage." The room went quiet. Marcus continued, "That facility has a drainage line that empties into deep water. If the line leaked or dumped illegally, the current would carry contamination directly through the whale's feeding path." Sheriff Mercer frowned. "North Point has permits." Marcus nodded. "Permits do not cover what I found." Linda laughed again, but this time it sounded nervous. "So now you are accusing a company that employs half this town." Marcus looked at the room. "I am saying something in the water is killing marine life, and if we do not find the source, your fishery could be next." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Men who had been glaring at him now looked at each other. The ocean was not just scenery in Bay Harbor. It was paychecks, mortgages, family names, and graves. Still, pride fought against fear. Earl stood and said, "You come here one day and tell us our own water is poisoned. We have worked that sea longer than you have been alive." Marcus answered quietly, "Then you should be the first ones demanding the truth." The meeting ended in anger. Outside, someone had spray painted on Marcus's truck, "Go home, liar." One of his assistants gasped when she saw it. Marcus only stared at the words for a long second, then opened the door and took out a flashlight. His assistant said, "Dr. Reed, we should call state police." Marcus said, "We will, after we check the North Channel." At midnight, Marcus drove alone toward the old Cannery Road. Fog lay thick over the pine trees, and the headlights cut through it like blades. The road narrowed near the cliffs, then dropped toward a rusted gate with a faded North Point sign. Marcus parked behind a stack of abandoned lobster traps and walked the rest of the way. From the hill above the facility, he saw lights moving near the water. 3 men in rain jackets stood beside a pipe that ran out beyond the rocks. A tanker truck idled without markings. One man opened a valve. A dark stream poured into the sea. Marcus raised his camera and recorded. His heart pounded, not from surprise, but from the weight of knowing. This was not an accident. This was not one bad pipe. This was a secret being emptied into the ocean while a whole town slept. Then, a branch snapped behind him. Marcus turned and saw Sheriff Mercer standing there with a flashlight pointed at his face. For a second, neither man spoke. The sheriff looked past him toward the facility, then back at Marcus. Marcus expected him to call it trespassing, expected handcuffs, expected the same cold suspicion he had seen all day. But Mercer's face had gone pale. The sheriff whispered, "My son works down there." Marcus lowered the camera. "Then help me stop it before he gets blamed for someone else's crime." Before Mercer could answer, shouting came from below. One of the workers had spotted movement on the hill. A floodlight swung toward them. Marcus and Mercer ran through the trees as voices followed behind them. A truck engine roared. They reached the sheriff's cruiser just as headlights appeared on the road. Mercer slammed the car into reverse, spun around, and sped back toward town. By dawn, Marcus had the footage, the samples, and the sheriff's statement. But North Point moved faster. At 8 in the morning, the company released a statement saying Dr. Marcus Reed had trespassed on private property, interfered with operations, and spread false claims that endangered local jobs. By 9, local radio hosts were calling him a fraud. By 10, angry residents gathered outside the small motel where Marcus and his team were staying. Linda Barrett stood in front of them, holding a sign that said "Save our town from lies." Reporters shoved microphones toward Marcus as he stepped outside. "Did you trespass?" one asked. "Are you trying to shut down North Point?" Another shouted. "Is this about race?" someone asked from the back. Marcus looked at the crowd and saw fear wearing the mask of hatred. He saw people who had been taught to protect the hand stealing from them because the thief looked familiar and the warning came from someone who did not. He said, "This is about poisoned water." A man threw a coffee cup. It hit the pavement near Marcus's shoes and burst open. Brown liquid splashed across his pants. His assistant shouted, but Marcus raised one hand to stop her. He looked at Linda and said, "If I am wrong, the tests will prove it. If I am right, every hour you delay helps the people destroying your coast." Linda's face tightened, but she said nothing. That afternoon, the first fishing boat came back early. Then another. Then 5 more. Their nets were full of dead herring, floating belly up, silver bodies dull and stiff. Men who had screamed at Marcus the day before now stood on the docks with empty eyes. Earl held a handful of dead fish and whispered, "I have never seen this in 40 years. Marcus moved quickly. He gathered samples from the nets and tested them on the dock. The chemical markers matched the flakes found on the whales. The contamination had entered the food chain. The harbor was no longer just watching a tragedy. It was standing inside one. Then came the emergency call. A group of teenagers had taken a small boat near the North Channel before the closure warning reached them. Their engine failed and contaminated water near the facility. One of them was Linda Barrett's daughter, Katie. The Coast Guard was 20 minutes away. The sheriff's boat was down for repairs. The wind was rising, and fog was thickening over the water. Linda ran toward Marcus on the dock, her face destroyed by panic. "Please," she said, grabbing his sleeve. "Please, my daughter is out there." The same woman who had accused him, mocked him, and led the crowd against him was now looking at him like he was the only person left in the world. Marcus did not mention the meeting. He did not mention the sign. He did not mention the coffee thrown at his feet. He simply turned to Earl and said, "Which boat is fastest?" 2 minutes later, Marcus, Earl, and Sheriff Mercer were racing into the fog. The water slapped hard against the hull. The chemical smell grew stronger as they neared the channel. Marcus used GPS coordinates from the teenager's emergency call, but visibility dropped so low the world became only gray air and black water. Then they heard coughing. Earl cut the engine. Marcus shouted into the fog. A weak voice answered. They found the teenagers clinging to a disabled boat half filled with water. Katie was unconscious, her lips pale, her hands shaking. Marcus climbed across, lifted her carefully, and checked her breathing. Chemical exposure, cold shock, panic in the lungs. He worked fast, giving oxygen, flushing her eyes, wrapping her in a thermal blanket. As they pulled away, a wave slammed the boats together. Marcus lost his balance and nearly went overboard, but Earl grabbed him by the jacket. For 1 second, the old fisherman and the black scientist held onto each other with both hands, the ocean trying to take them both. Earl pulled him back and shouted, "I got you." Marcus nodded once and went back to saving Katie. When they returned to the dock, Linda broke through the crowd and fell beside her daughter. Katie coughed, opened her eyes, and whispered, "Mom." Linda sobbed so hard she could barely breathe. Then she looked up at Marcus. The whole town watched her face collapse, under shame. She said, "I am sorry." It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but in that moment, it carried more weight than every accusation she had thrown at him. Marcus looked at her and said, "Help me make sure no other mother has to do this." By nightfall, state environmental agents arrived. Marcus handed over the samples, the footage, the fish tests, and the sheriff's statement. North Point's facility was raided before midnight. Investigators found hidden storage tanks, falsified water reports, and a private email chain proving illegal dumping had been happening for months. The company had saved millions by pouring toxic waste into the sea and letting the tide carry the evidence away. They never expected the whales to bring the truth back to shore. The next morning, Bay Harbor gathered again at the beach. This time, nobody held signs, nobody shouted. The dead whales were being prepared for removal, and the whole town stood in silence as workers moved carefully around them. Marcus stood near the water, exhausted, his jacket stained with salt and mud. Earl walked up beside him and removed his cap. He said, "I judged you before I heard you." Marcus looked at the ocean. "A lot of people did." Earl nodded, his eyes wet. "My father taught me the sea tells the truth. Yes, I forgot people can lie louder than waves." Linda arrived with Katie beside her, wrapped in a hospital blanket. She walked directly to Marcus, while cameras recorded from a respectful distance. Her voice trembled as she said, "Yesterday I tried to make this town afraid of you. Today my daughter is alive because of you. I cannot undo what I said, but I can say the truth now. Dr. Marcus Reed came here to save us, and we treated him like the danger." No one clapped at first. The silence was too heavy. Then Katie stepped forward and hugged Marcus. That broke something open. Earl began clapping. Then the sheriff. Then the fishermen. Then the restaurant workers, parents, reporters, and children. The sound rose across the beach, not like celebration, but like a town finally admitting what it had done. Marcus did not smile much. He simply looked at the whales, then at the people, and said, "Respect should not have to be earned by saving someone's life. Truth should not depend on who speaks it. And when prejudice makes you ignore a warning, you do not just hurt the person you judge, you hurt everyone standing behind you." Months later, Bay Harbor changed. North Point executives faced federal charges. The cleanup took longer than anyone wanted, but the water slowly began to heal. The fishermen worked with Marcus's research team to monitor the coast. Linda renamed her restaurant's main dining room the Reed Room, not as a decoration, but as a reminder. Earl volunteered with the Youth Marine program and told every child the same lesson. Never let fear choose who you listen to. And every year, on the morning the whales returned to Bay Harbor's waters, the town gathered quietly at the shore. Marcus came back too, not as an outsider, not as a suspect, not as the man they doubted, but as the scientist who had seen the truth before anyone wanted it. He stood beside the same ocean that had carried death, evidence, and finally forgiveness. And when the first whale rose from the water and disappeared again beneath the waves, the people of Bay Harbor understood something they would never forget. Sometimes the person you push away is the only one brave enough to save you.